first of all, we have Lena Wiberg. She is engineering manager at Blocket, that it's Sweden's largest marketplace. And Lena has been working for in many testing roles, and you believe actually in continuous improvement as a mean of, I guess, as a mean of working, as a mean of living, and that's actually a pretty cool way of going about it. We have Alex, and I'm gonna kill this one, Schladebeck.
Schladebeck, well, nice one, well done.
Oh, good for me. She is the CEO and head of quality at Bredex in Germany, and she's a passionate tester, passionate human being, and full of energy. If you follow her on Twitter, I hate you for the walks you do on the weekends and the pictures that you post on the weekends.
Sorry.
We have Lisa. Hi, Lisa. Wait.
Hello.
Hey, Lisa. She's the only one who has sunlight outside, so do with that as you wish. Lisa, she's the co-author of most of the Agile testing books, and I really like the Agile testing condensed. I enjoyed it so much because it was like, oh, you read all the other ones, so go ahead and read this one and you'll remember only what needs to be remembered. And I loved it. For someone like me, it was great. And what I love more about Lisa, and again, if you've met her, you know what I'm saying, she's the most down-to-earth tester that you know, and I love the way that you always manage to make testing simple and approachable to everyone who talks to you, and I love you for that. And last but not least, we have Gitte. Oh God, help me please, Klitgaard?
Yeah, it's close enough.
Thank you. Now, Gitte, if you know her, if you've met her, I've met her, you realize very quickly why you say that she's a hugger, meaning I love it. And a hugger, not in the sense of hugging, a hugger in the sense of making you feel comfortable and making you feel loved. And when you talk to her, and we actually met in New York City, I think about 2 years ago on a restaurant, Italian restaurant. I think it was great speaking with you. And from the first time, you realize that the way that you can actually make everyone who speaks with you feel secure, received, and comfortable in a sense. And I love it. I really like that. And also what you do for a living, you're an Agile coach as well, and you have a keen interest in on help people function and how can we actually work with our vulnerabilities in the workplace. So that was with my formal introductions. Now, having said that, as we agreed, I'm going to step aside. I'm going to let you all review the topic. And if someone is encouraged enough to ask questions, then I will just jump in and interrupt and make sure that I can provide more fuel for the conversation. But I'm going to step out and let you go ahead, and I'll concentrate on my stuff.
We didn't decide who was going to start.
I can't see Lena. I can only see Alex and Gitte. Is there
The way that it works is basically the person who will be speaking will be seeing more of the others. So that's just take into account. That's
okay. Lena, say something so I can see you.
I pick gallery view. That way I can see all.
Oh, can I do
Who
gallery
wants
when
to
there's a
start?
slide showing?
I will stop the slide and let's see what happens. I think that might help.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, now I can do gallery.
This is awesome. Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know this, up in the right corner, that you can pick gallery view, and that will enable you to see all of us at the same time.
Hooray!
Cool. Now we can start. We didn't decide who was going to go first.
So you start.
No, I already. Oh. The trick is getting me to shut up. So we decided that we wanted to start talking first about why healthy culture is so important, right? Those were our discussions. Okay, so I'll start. It's actually funny that Joel then just said it, because he then, after he referred to us as girls and we corrected him, sorry Joel, we're going to keep doing it. that he said humans, and that's, for me, that's the thing, because we're all humans. I love humans. They're sticky, they're difficult, they're individual. And we put ourselves and put other people in situations where we have to use our brains for 40 hours plus a week. And why would we not want to do that in a situation where those people feel good about it? That's, for me, I think, the reason why it's so important to talk about it.
Yeah, for me, as and both in my job, but also in general, what I think about is, I find that if we can create a really healthy environment, we can get so much more out of people. So seen from a company perspective, it makes sense because you get more brain power out of people, you get more innovation, you get more ideas. And seen from a human perspective, it makes sense because we don't have to spend energy being nervous about how things are, or if we are accepted, or if it's okay to make mistakes. We can just be who we are and be our best selves at work. And I think that's why we need to nurture these cultures, because also if we don't nurture them, they don't just happen on their own. Culture is something we create. And unless we take the time and energy to nurture it, we might end up in a culture that we don't like.
I just started a new job, and when I started my job search, I was trying to think. It's like I thought I knew what I wanted to do, and I was just kind of lost though in my search. And at European Testing Conference, Micah Brinkhoff did a talk, and one of the things she said was really flipped the switch for me. She said what was most important to her was being part of a team that all collaborated and helped her learn, and they helped each other. And I thought that kind of sums it up, because I know that I work best and can contribute the most when I'm in a collaborative environment. And so it really made me realize I needed to look for a company with a really healthy culture, and that really put a lot of conscious emphasis on that.
Yeah, so I was going to be the bad one and use the business perspective, but Gitte beat me to the punch, because I figured the rest of you would all talk about the human perspective, so I was going to go in with business perspective. But it makes sense on every level, because if people are comfortable, if the culture is healthy, it's going to make the company more money. People are going to stay longer, they're going to produce more, and everyone will in general just be happier and more innovative. So I can't see any reason why we wouldn't want to have that.
I think some of the reasons why people don't have this, I think, is because it takes time and it takes effort. And if you go in and you use management by fear, or in whatever form that is, you will get results on a short-term basis. But you will burn people out. You might not get enough quality. People are gonna leave you, and even if they don't leave you, they're not gonna be at their best. But short term, it can look like it's the best solution, and it does take a lot of effort. And I think that's why people don't invest in it. Also, because you can't just say, okay, if I do this one thing, then our company is gonna be happy and positive, and we're gonna have a great nurturing environment. There's a lot of work all the time, and it's not always obvious that you can see what the results are. I think that's one of the reasons why people don't invest in this. It's much easier to see, okay, if we train them in this one thing, then they can produce more code or test better or automate better, whatever. But encouraging people to be themselves, it's harder to see what the result is.
And it's harder to do for yourself as well, because I think that culture is definitely something that you have to do, where you have to walk the walk and talk the talk. You have to be able to say why that you're doing and reacting the way you are. Like if someone comes and says, okay, I did this wrong, that you say, okay, I'm glad you told me, and I want us to be like that. And you also have to react then correctly according to the things that you're saying. And that takes, I mean, especially for leaders as well, that takes the vulnerability that you need to be able then to say, I make mistakes too, and I'm going to talk about my mistakes. And that on top of everything else can be pretty exhausting, even if it is part of your culture. To, you know, you're sitting there in front of the spreadsheet that you just messed up and the customer wasn't pleased, and with your own sadness and fear or whatever, to say to someone, okay, yeah, I messed this up today and I learned that. It's a lot of work, but it's so worth it. It's because only then will people see that they really can, because if you just talk about it and don't show it, people will say, okay, that's how we talk here, but that's not how we actually are.
I noticed we have questions both in our Slack channel and in the Q&A and maybe in the chat. Do we want to?
Yeah,
I'm actually letting you talk a little bit more. I'm monitoring.
Oh, you're going to do the questions. Okay, good. I thought we were just totally on our own.
I was asked to interrupt when I think it's the time. So I'm
Okay.
taking my time.
Multitask right now.
So then I can just keep talking for a while longer. So Gitte and I did a talk about modern leadership last year, I think.
Yep.
Time just blends into each other. But so I mentioned in that talk that the time that I realized that I could actually be a manager and enjoy it was when I realized that it was finally okay to be vulnerable. And that has always come more natural to me. So to me, it took so much energy not to show my fear, not to show that it was okay to fail. So for me, it was kind of the opposite to what Alex just said. It takes so much less energy for me to be open about it, everything. And I realized that that's not for everyone, but for me, it was a big relief when I realized that I can be a great leader, I can be a great manager, I can make business result, and I can also be completely open and vulnerable and just me.
Isn't it the loveliest feeling to realize that you can be authentic?
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think one of the problems is that a lot of leaders or managers don't have role models that show this. Because if you look at what I would love to call old-fashioned management, but it's sadly still a lot of current management, a lot of managers, and the higher up you get, have been taught that you fight for your place, you fight for your turf, and you don't you don't show weakness, because if you show weakness, somebody's going to come after you. And these are the role models that we have up in the organizations, and it takes a long time to break those patterns. It takes a long time. And even if people who are at high levels, Alex is a fairly young CEO. We have a lot of CEOs that's probably twice her age. And if they have never been able to show this vulnerability or been allowed to show this vulnerability, how are they supposed to help others gain it? Even if they learn and figure out this is the right thing to do, they might not know how. And I think the role modeling that Alex was talking about, I think that's so essential, because it's a way of showing this is okay. But it does take an effort if you have been trained in not doing this. And I think that's what even not only managers, but especially men have been trained not to, because, men are not weak, men don't have emotions.
I want to take that to another point, because you're saying something that I agree. But you know what? Let me be the bad guy here for a second. Alex, you're the CEO. Lena, you're a director. Lisa, you're basically a testing rock star. Gitte, you're a consultant. What about all the rest of us who need to work with the freaking directors who don't really care if you have a kid who, well, they know that you need to take care of it. And yes, we work in a place where my wife works even more hours than I do, so I need to go out. But at the end of the day, I'm going to be measured by the fact, it's not even the fact that I didn't get my job done. It was the fact that I left at 4 p.m. And I'm talking as a guy, because I had to take my kid to the doctor. Oh, yeah, on theory, everything's good and fine. But at the end of the day, someone who actually stuck more here because they don't care about their partners or they don't have any kids, then they're going to get that promotion, not I'm going to be able to do it. So what do I do?
I think that's even more pertinent now that people have had to be working from home and taking care of their kids and making, educating their kids. Maybe I think that crises like this really help us see the leadership. And I was actually heartened to start this new job and hear the CEO say repeatedly that everybody understands that it's very difficult for everyone at home. I mean, some people don't have good internet, or they don't have a video camera, or they don't have, or they are sharing an office with their partner or their kids, and they're like, whatever works for you works for us. Don't stress about it. If you don't feel like you have to work an 8-hour day, we know that your kids are important and you got to feed them and take care of them. And for him to repeat that message, I don't have kids, but it makes me feel good to know that the company leaders care enough to keep saying that and try to reassure people to not stress out about it.
Yeah, and I think it's changing. The the image of people having to work millions of hours, I think it's changing, because I hear so many business leaders stating the same message that you said, Lisa. And I was interviewed for an article about how to manage people remotely now in the crisis, and I noticed that the general message in all of the interviews was just this: we understand that this is a special situation. We understand that we need to do different types of leading people. So I mean, I understand that not every company is there, but I do believe that we are moving in that direction. So I hope that it will change with time.
And I think it's also about making choices. I think it's about, so like if you look at Stockholm, for instance, the last numbers I heard is that we are missing 60,000 developers. And I know it's changed during this crisis that we have now, so it might not be as many positions, but we are living in a world where the skills that we have, whether it's developing or designing or testing or whatever, good engineering managers, good CEOs, there's a demand for this, which also means we can make active choices. We can make an active choice and say, okay, this company does not value what I do. Is this a place I want to work? No, it's not. And then start looking for something else. Maybe ask your network for something else. And not everyone has that option, of course. I mean, if you have, I'm lucky in that sense that I'm alone. I just have me. I rent my apartment. I can move in with my family if I need to. So that way it's easier for me to just quit my job if I wasn't a consultant. And if you have your kids, you have to feed them. Of course, you need to think about these things. But we do have a lot more choices than we think. And just as I believe we should make ethical choices, which Lena can talk on for a very long time, about who we work for, we can also make choices about ourselves. Do we actually want to work for a company that does not value that I take the time to leave at 4? If that means that I will be a more focused worker when I am at work.
I think as well, I mean, and this is not going to be across the board for all situations, but depending on where you are, everybody has a sphere of influence within their team. So even if the change that you can be is that, okay, maybe somebody's manager doesn't deal with them in that way, but if you can deal with your team in that way, that this is how culture can happen too. I mean, most specifically, you can't dictate culture and how we are with each other from the top. It has to be through and through. It has to be all levels. And if it starts with the person in the team that says, okay, the way that my managers have dealt with me is not the way I want to deal with people, and start that change, that again, it costs effort. It costs even more effort if you're going against the grain, and you might get bashed on the head by your manager for doing things, but sometimes that's how change happens as well.
Yeah, and Joel is kind to say, "Oh, that I'm some kind of rock star," but that cuts no ice with the teams I work on. Nobody cares that we speak at conferences or write books or whatever. So I face the same struggles to try to influence, and yeah, so I've just tried to educate myself on how to be a change agent, doing things like using the patterns from Linda Rising and Mary Lynn Mann's More Fearless Change book. It gives me some extra tools to find ways to influence people, or proposing small experiments to my team. So it's all one big experiment for me. Like, what can I do to get people to try a new idea or talk about a problem?
Yeah, and I think you can also go in and you can do culture hacking. Like, one of the things I use very much both in my life but also in my work is the prime directive from Norm Kerr, which is originated in retrospectives, which is basically the main point is we truly believe that everyone did the best they could under the circumstances. And one of the things I do sometimes in companies is I print these out and put them at coffee machines, or I put them at the inside door of toilets. And you can do small things like that as well. So you can kind of, bring up the point of what you want to be in. And we want to have environments where we truly do believe that people did their best because people mostly do. It is very rare that I meet anyone who's not doing the best they can. But let's say they don't sleep for 2 days because they have a kid who's getting teeth or whatever. They're not going to be the best that they could be in the rest of the time, but they're going to be the best they can under those circumstances. And nurturing that environment, I think, is essential for a good company.
It's a good thing for anyone with a tester mindset to practice as well. One thing that I like to try and do is that if people are asking, okay, well, why did this get decided like this, or why have we gone in this direction? Because if you don't have the big picture for something, then it can sometimes feel like, oh, you deliberately did this to hurt me, or you didn't consider this. And sometimes there are mistakes in there, never deliberate. Obviously, we're all only human. But then to ask people to say, okay, well, why do you think that it got decided like that? And to try and convince them to think of, okay, what kind of reasons could there have been that are not the other person hates me, or the other person did it to spite me, or the other person is an idiot. And usually people on their own will come up with reasons why, oh yeah, well, maybe this happens, or maybe this happens. And even if those aren't the reasons, just getting the people to realize that there might be a reason for why somebody acted or did like this. Yeah, I always find when this is a good culture thing, is to take your day's holiday, because I find when I come back off holiday, I can come into any conflict situation. And if I've got people arguing or problems here and problems there, when I come back from holiday, I'm able to kind of go, I can see all of these perspectives and see how they can all be valid. Whereas the 2 days before my holiday, I'm in the middle of it. Take your holiday, people.
Yeah, so on the topic of seeing different perspectives, I really like to ask people to use the magic power of 3. So you can't say something is true until you've thought of at least 2 other options and ruled them out. So
yeah,
I find that really powerful.
Yeah.
It's a good thing to break, I mean, just on a personal level, of breaking open your not particularly helpful thought patterns as well, right?
Yeah, I find you can use it in many situations. So like what you mentioned, Alex, about finding reasons why people would do this, is something I use when I have empathy exercises with people, for instance. Because using that exercise, you kind of have to be in the other person's shoes. You put yourself there. And by doing that, we train our empathy. We might find actually the reasons for it, and or maybe not. And then we can go maybe ask them about it, and kind of like, I'm curious, what made you react this way? But just training that also helps us understand each other better, I think, as humans. And like you started by saying, Alex, we're all humans, and that's messy, but it's also what makes it worth working in this. Yeah, also you, Lena, you're also human. Yeah.
It's what makes it fun, and yeah, and that's I think for us here in the panel, it's so obvious that that's a thing that we should be aware of and looking out for, and we've all understood that always, and yeah, there are still places where I don't think that this is even on the radar. Yeah.
So let me ask a question around that, because that's exactly the question that Honey has in here. What if, as an engineering, you try to mention change, culture, feedback to senior management, but they're too stubborn to even admit their mistakes in hiring, let's say, mid-level managers, who they are the ones who are running and ruining the culture of the company? Meaning you're in a stage of being an engineer, trying to convince management that they might be wrong on actually the mid-level who's working here. And I guess it's very specific, but what I would like to hear here is, okay, so you have a manager, and it happens quite a lot. People are not always as open to admit their mistakes. Some people feel vulnerable if they do it. And you need to get them to admit that mistake. How do you help them do it in order to change that culture, especially if you're not coming from a power position?
I think it's not about getting them to admit their mistakes. I think it's about helping them see that there's a better way. Because if we go into saying they need to admit their mistakes, what we are talking about is a blame culture. And that would be the opposite of what we want to achieve. So it's about helping them to figure out, there are better ways here, and maybe give them some options for that. And yes, it would be awesome if people would just admit their mistakes. But like I said, we've been conditioned not to, for a lot of us, whether it's in school or it's at work, we've been conditioned to not talk about our mistakes. But being curious about, how can we help you find new options that will help the rest of the company. So it's also about showing them what's in it for them. Because if they don't see what's in it for them, why would they want to change? And if you come in with the attitude of, I want you to admit your mistakes, they're going to go into defense position, because that's how our brain works.
Yeah, so one of the principles that I've learned in my leadership training is to help people not lose faith.
Yeah.
And you can do that in a multitude of ways. You can make it so the mistake doesn't feel so big. You can make it by admitting your own mistakes first. You can do it in a number of ways, but I think it's really important, as Gitte said, that it's not about having someone admit they did something wrong. It's about doing things in a different way because of reasons. So find out what motivates someone and find a way to how they would gain something from acting in the way you want them to act, because people want to do good, I believe.
Just yesterday, that my team lead was started apologizing because he felt like he'd done something wrong in my onboarding, or hadn't supported me in a certain way or something. And I said, there's no blame here. There's no failure. Like we're just learning. There's no failure, only learning. And he's like, oh, I really like that. But it should be true. And we should help people see that, even if they did something that annoyed us. It's still, if they realize it, then great. And if they didn't realize it, then like you say, just try to find some way to influence them, make them see what's in it for them to try something different.
And I think if we, and speaking as someone who feels like she often feels the hard end of this, I guess maybe you ladies get this too. That mid-manager in this situation is also a human trying to do the best they can with the situation that they have, which might mean that instead of going and complaining to someone else about them, that maybe the conversation of, hey, I noticed this, I think it might be a problem, I really want to help you achieve your goals, is what are your goals? Could we try something? Like, sure, that conversation might not always go right, but this idea of somebody's been brought in and they're doing things wrong and badly, and I'll go and complain to their superior. That's we also often forget that also people who manage are humans too, and they are also dealing with the situation as best they can.
Well, and we have to ask for their help, which I have a hard time doing, and we have to give them feedback, which I can also have a hard time doing. So
was there another question, Joel, or should we carry on?
There are plenty, but you're actually doing quite a good job. There is one here, and again, I think it's let's see how it goes. Aren't we confusing culture with culture in management with competency? Meaning maybe these guys are not good managers.
Sure, I think that a certain amount of culture is going to come from the way the company is managed, which means that if you're doing good management, then you are more likely to have good culture. I don't think it's just as easy as that, because if it was, I don't believe in things that are that easy. Because culture is, it's habits that everybody does. It's one of the ways that I like to think about it is, if somebody new comes into the company, what habits do they pick up? What behaviors do they pick up? And if you notice that they're asking things when you're like, oh, I really thought that we didn't have to ask that question. That's not going to be just from management, because they are working with people in their projects. So no, it's not the same thing, but I think it is very much linked to each other. You have to have that kind of vision, and you have to, like I think Gitte was saying before, you have to have the role models. You have to have the people who at the end of the day are the leaders there, and everything else can't be fine if the leaders are going in a different direction. It is linked.
Yeah, and I think it's skills that you can pick up. Like I said, one of the things I do, for instance, is empathy training. You can actually learn empathy. And so there are competencies that you can learn, but you can be a really, really good manager. You can be really, really good at taking care of your company and your people, but not know how to influence culture. And I think this is kind of an area we haven't really moved into before. It's still kind of like a little bit, we are trying out this and that. And when I say we, I mean the IT industry. Because it's happening in a lot of other industries. And one of the things we're not very good at in IT is actually looking at other places. We like to invent our own things and figure out how to do it. But building that culture is not, I don't think we've been aware that it's actually a thing. It's just something that is there. And just like habits and culture and all these things are things that we don't think about because it's so built into us unless we actively take a step back. And you won't take that step back if you're not aware that it's a thing.
Yeah.
I'm going over, there's like a ton of questions here, so I'm trying to check which one would actually help out in here. I have a question that actually came from me. Sorry that I will hijack this. But I've seen it a number of times, and people have asked me, and I really don't know how to answer this. So the situation might be that there's someone who has made mistakes, we all have, and then we need to live with them. But we feel that we're already, we carry that scarlet letter of all the mistakes we did. And not only do we feel it, but yeah, our team will basically look at us based on the mistakes we did in the past. People are not really good at forgiving, especially if you made mistakes. How do you get out of that mud pit? What do you tell someone who's saying, hey, you know what? I learned from it, but my team is not letting me get out of it because they don't trust me anymore.
I disagree with the fact that people are bad at forgiving. I think people are really good at forgiving. So what I've seen is that if you actually show that you have learned and you did take actions to not do the same mistake again, there are very few people who won't forgive you and trust you again.
Well, and another thing too, it depends on the kind of problem that they had or the mistake they made. But a lot of times people say, oh, I did something wrong and it caused a problem in production. Well, you know what? We should be designing our own systems and processes so that people can't fail like that. And if somebody pushes a button and brings production down, that's not their fault. That's the whole team failed to do something that made it safe, that made people not able to fail in that way. And so it needs to be looked at in that way instead of blaming an individual. How can we make it so that that problem can't happen?
And if someone came to me with that question, hopefully I would be in the organization so I could help them facilitate a discussion about it. Yeah. Because I think the thing with trust is that if you betray trust, then it can be really hard to rebuild. But a lot of the mistakes we make are not about trust. If a mistake is that you tell a stupid joke that hurts someone, yes, it might take a bit before that person forgives you, or maybe they will be so angry they won't forgive you. But if you have a truly safe environment, it needs to be okay to also make these mistakes. We cannot have an environment where it's only okay to make the right mistakes, like the production environment and stuff like that. So the safe environment is about creating a place where, like Lisa said, everything we can avoid by making it automatically or by having processes, let's get that out of the way. And then we have the mistakes that we can just predict. And those are the ones we need to talk about. And some of them will be easy to forgive, and some of them will take longer, but you need to have an environment where you can have that discussion.
And we really do need to talk about these things. Like so often, this is why I really advocate talking about why I've made decisions and talking about my feelings as well, because there's this, I wish I could remember where I'd read it, but it's this idea of, okay, I saw this, and the story I'm telling myself because of this is how I'm interpreting it. And even just learning to separate what you've observed from what you're interpreting and being able to talk about that, because every single person walks around with different values and different experiences and different things that will trigger them to react, or there's never overreaction, it's only ever reacting in a context, right? And if we don't ever talk about those things, then how is anybody ever going to know that that's the way Alex's head is, or that's the way Gitte thinks about these things? And those conversations I mean, if we're used to having conversations about who broke the build, having conversations about how my feelings are to something, those are hard conversations. But wow, are they important? That's what I want the culture to be able to support, that somebody who goes to someone and says, okay, this really did hurt my feelings, or this is difficult for me because of this. Those conversations have to be able to happen.
But let me take a question that goes directly to what you're saying, Alex. And here the question is, how do you show your vulnerabilities, sorry, English late at night, in a case where there is at least one colleague which is who does not respect boundaries and blames other or depreciate others for achievements? We cannot change someone in that case if that person does not want to change himself. So we have that rotten apple in the middle, and it's actually making a lot of trouble. What do you do?
I'd say, for one thing, just me being vulnerable and showing vulnerability does not mean I don't have my own boundaries. It doesn't mean I'm going to take, can I swear? It doesn't mean I'll just take crap. That's
other people already swore. So Alan swearing was earlier in the day. So I think that we're okay.
I'm good.
Okay, so you set up your boundaries.
I think that if one person starts showing that they are vulnerable and they get hurt and they do react to bad behavior, I think that's the best way to change the mood of a group, because other people are probably feeling the same way, and if you dare to step up and show that you react, and someone else will, it's a ripple effect. So, and then in the end, the person with the bad behavior is hopefully the last one standing, and no one likes to be alone. So they will hopefully either adapt or choose to leave the group.
There's also trying to be curious about why is the person acting like this. If a person uses a lot of blame and pushing away, maybe they have in one way or another been punished in a different company. Maybe they've been in a company where, if they made a mistake, they would be ridiculed, or they would, maybe they got fired because of something they did or something they spoke about. And what happens when this happens to us is we build up these defense mechanisms and we try to push away and saying it's not us because we want to protect ourselves. So even if you have a safe environment, one of the people could come from an environment that's not safe, because we have all our history with us always, and we have triggers with us, and it takes time to change these. There are ways of changing them, but it takes time and effort. And if I had someone like that in my team, I would go talk to them and kind of like, it seems like you're really struggling with these things. I noticed that it's really hard for you to talk about it when you make mistakes. Can we have a talk about that? And maybe they won't the first time, but maybe they will the fifth time I ask them.
Okay, I guess that you're not talking with Israelis. After the third time, they just start screaming at you.
Well, I have to deal with Israelis as well.
Good luck to them, I meant.
Some survived.
Yeah, wow, good for them. There's a question here that I think, Gitte, actually goes to something that you said before. You were talking about culture hacking, and I guess that you mentioned one or two examples. Can you expand on that a little bit more? What do you mean by that, and how does it work? Especially for someone who comes not from a high level, meaning from a low level, basically.
Yeah, so it's about going in and doing those small things. I think it was Alex who said something about we have much more influence than we think. And like, so the example I mentioned is about putting up a poster, or, maybe when you go to the coffee machine, you can bring coffee back to your colleague. Yeah. Which is actually also an influencing pattern from one of the books Lisa was talking about, because that shows kindness, and kindness spreads. So it's about doing all these small things. Maybe, if you see someone sitting on their own at lunch, it's kind of like, would you like to join us? Maybe they like to eat lunch on their own, especially introverts can sometimes need that space. But, make it an offer, kind of, would you like to join us for lunch? And those are things you can do no matter where you are in the organization. Maybe you even go ask your CEO for lunch, because maybe nobody asks her because she's the CEO.
I'm going to get so many lunch offers, thanks, Gitte.
I know.
Well, and the other thing that's another thing I learned from Linda Rising, she knows everything, is that one of the best ways to start building a relationship is to ask for help. Because if somebody does a favor for you, then in their brain, they think, oh, this must be my friend. I did something for them. I think they call that the Ben Franklin effect or something, because he loaned somebody a book that was his enemy, and then his enemy was his friend. So that's a really simple way, and of course offering help also, but it's a simple way to start building relationships.
And even just like I started a tiny experiment in our Teams channel, which was a Today I Learned channel.
Oh, nice.
For anything, it was an experiment, and I started it like 3 months ago, and it's going strong. And people put everything in there from I learned this about this testing framework today, and today I shared that I learned, fortunately in a good way, that if you forward on a meeting invite to someone else, the original meeting creator does not get your text, which is probably a good thing for the meeting that I forwarded today. And so anything, and people, it was an experiment. People might have gone, oh, I'm not doing this, but people have really taken to it, and they're sharing information, and also sharing things where they're like, whoa, that was a bit of a mistake and it was fine. And they're tiny things. And I don't think it's the fact that I started it. In fact, I specifically think that it was detrimental to it that I was the one starting it, because things like that can feel like they're coming from somewhere above or whatever. Small things can make such a big difference.
Yeah, and just to connect back to what Lisa said, people generally like people that like them.
Yeah.
So it's being friendly to people is a great way of kind of hacking them to start liking you.
It actually makes sense.
If we get into Jedi mind tricks, I do have Yoda.
Oh, that's Baby Yoda. It's
I
not
know.
only.
I'm so jealous.
He makes my life better. Okay, sorry.
I have. Well, you cannot see it. You want to see it? I have a. Wait. I have a unicorn.
Of course, we all.
And obviously, I also have a minion, because you need to have both. Oh, come on, Alex! Stop bragging.
I've got a whole bunch of unicorns, but they're in the other room.
This is my tiny dragon. So,
Lena, your turn.
I have a statue of myself and my husband as miniatures.
Oh, that's cool.
Adorable.
Aw. Yeah, I do have a unicorn.
My dear human friends, as always, I would say that it's a pleasure, but that's always the case. It's extremely enlightening to listen to what you're saying, and I think that it actually refreshes with optimism, if I need to put it in a place, because I think that for many of us it's hard because we're disconnected and we're challenged not on with pressure, and something that I realized when I talk to everyone says, oh, working from home should be easier. No, working from home is about 3 times more work because you don't have any balance at all. And it's basically a drop of fresh air, listening to you and getting this type of feedback. So I really wanted to thank you for the time it took to share it with us as well.
Thank you.
My pleasure, and we can keep talking about this on the Slack channel too.